Welcome back. This week I put a new cylinder and piston on a weed eater. I go over to my son's house and help him do a top end on a Kawasaki four-wheeler. And also we get started on the fenders for the pull tractor. I'm also going to show you this bike I went to look at to purchase and then explain to you why I didn't. We're here at my son Michael's house. He's got a Kawasaki 220 four-wheeler doing a top end on. He's already got the engine out of it and the top end apart. We're going to get this piston off of here, put the new piston on it, start getting everything set up to put the engine back together. With the pin clip out of the way, we can push the wrist pin through the piston and get the piston off the rod. Alright, I've got a new piston and pin lubed up, ready to put back on the rod. Now I'll put our other new clip in and we'll be ready to start putting the cylinder back on. With the cylinder lubricated and ready, we've got a new gasket down for the base, and we're going to try to get our timing chain and our piston put up through the jug and get it set back down on the block. Alright, go down nice and easy and get our down pin set. Alright, with the jug in place now, we've got the piston at the top dead center. We're going to set the head on it and get our timing set. Got it. Okay. Alright, so now we're going to put the head bolts in and get these torqued down. Then we can put our cam gear on. After we get the head bolts run down and seated, we'll put our 25 pound-feet of torque on them. Once we got all four of them torqued, we're going to go through and redo them all in the next pattern again. Feeding the cam gear up through the chain, then we'll get the cam lined up. We'll set the adjustment for the chain, and then we can adjust the valves. Alright, so the timing chain is in now. We've got our crank and our cam both lined up perfectly. So now we're going to put the chain tensioner back in and get it adjusted. So we're about to put the automatic tensioner in now. What we've done is we've compressed the tensioner here, and we put a longer bolt in the top here that keeps the tensioner in place. What we're going to do is, after we get the slack off of the timing chain, we're going to pop this bolt, and then that's going to cause that spring to push out, and that's going to put the tension onto the timing chain, and then the automatic tensioner can take over from there. Now we're just going to seat the one bolt to keep tension on it. Alright, so we're going to roll the engine forward a little bit to get the slop on the back side of the chain. See, it's tight there, got some slop there on the back side. So now what we're going to do is release that bolt, and that's going to, you should hear a pop as it sets the chain. Got the tension, is it tighter? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got tension on the chain now. Alright, we've got the intake adjusted. Now Michael's doing the exhaust valve. We're setting it at about 9 thousandths. Just looking for a little bit of drag out of it. And then once it gets that correct, we'll hold the screw and you can tighten down the jam nut. With the engine back together, we're going to try to get it set back in the frame. Alright, we've got the engine put back into the frame, bolted tight. Michael's got the pull start back on. We're hooking up some of the electricals now. And we're a little bit closer to getting this thing running again. Michael's putting a new solenoid on it as well. Carburetor's on order. It should be here in a couple of days, and then we can get this thing fired off. I went and looked at this 29 Harley that's for sale at an auction a couple hours from home, and I'm glad I did. The engine is definitely a 29, but the chassis I think is pre that. The reason I know that is because in 29 was the first year that Harley put dual headlights, and they also had a dash with an ammeter in it, which this one does not have. That coupled with the fact that it doesn't have a title, it's probably just a couple of things just kind of thrown together, so we'll steer clear of this one. So I'm sure you remember a few weeks back I blew the engine up on my tiller. I picked up a used engine, complete and ready to go, pretty cheaply. Smokes a little bit, but I can live with that for now. We're going to go ahead and mount this engine on the tiller and get this thing going again. Get all four of the bolts mounted here and tighten up the bracket bolt, and putting the belt on will just about do it. Alright, so I got the engine set up on this thing. All the controls are self-contained in the engine, so I don't need any of this anymore. So fire it up and let's see what happens. Said it would run. Let's see. I've got our new cylinder kit for our weed eater, so we're going to start installing that. The first step was to remove the piston. I've already taken out the piston clip. You got to make sure that you don't lose that, or it could fall down inside the crankcase and you not know it's in there. But we've got that done. We've knocked out the pin, so we've got the old piston off now, and we're going to start installing the new piston. We want to make sure that if they do come with an arrow on top of the piston, that they always face towards the exhaust side. So we're going to install that with our new pin and clips, and then we can put the cylinder on it. Our old piston only has one clip, and it has a boss for the wrist pin so that it can't slide out the other way. On our the one we're installing, it has two clips. We have to put one on each side. That's what retains the piston pin in the small end of the rod. So we're going to put the one clip in first before we put the pin in, because it's going to be a lot easier to do it while we're holding it than it is when it's installed onto the block. Clips are very tiny, piston's tiny. You have to be really careful. Be really careful when putting this clip in that you don't drop it. Our clip is in the piston now, so that's going to help retain our piston pin once we install it. We'll get this put onto the connecting rod, and then we'll put the other clip in. Then we'll be ready to put the cylinder on. I'm ready to put the piston on the connecting rod now. And again, I want to make sure that the arrow is facing the exhaust side. Now the pin's all the way through. I'll put the clip on this side, and that'll retain the piston. I'm about to install the rings on our new piston now, but I want to show you on the old one that there's these pins on the piston, and they're designed to keep the ring from moving and spinning around the piston. And that's important because in the cylinder we have these ports, since it's a two-stroke, for the air and fuel to come in and the exhaust to get out. And if those gaps in the ring lined up with the port, it would run very poorly, if at all. So it's really important to make sure that we install the rings correctly. Before I put that second clip in, I put a rag over top of the opening to the crankcase, so if the clip did come out, it wouldn't fall down in the crankcase. Let's put our rings on now. Be very gentle when I open these things up to put them on, because they are cast and they can break very easily. Put the bottom one on first. In this particular case, it doesn't matter which ring goes where. If it did, they'd have that marked. That one's on. Now we'll do the top one. Alright, I've got some oil on our piston and also in the cylinder. So now we're going to go ahead and get our cylinder installed onto back on the crankcase. They generally taper these things at the bottom a little bit, make it easy to get the rings through. This one not as much as I'd like to see, but it's working. Got the first one in. I'm just double checking the pin on the bottom one before I put it in the rest of the way. There we go. Alright, and put our bolts in, and we have our engine. Now I'm ready to mount the engine back to the housing for the weed eater. Got a new intake gasket put on now, and now I'm going to mount the base of the intake to the engine. We just need to get these snug enough to compress the gasket before we put the carburetor on. Now we'll get our fuel tank and carburetor put back on. The fuel tank goes on next because the pull start is what actually holds it in place. The tank doesn't actually bolt in. Fits in two slots on this side, and then this big slot here is what fits over top of the tank, and that's what holds it secure. Alright, we'll put our new gasket on for the carburetor. Our cable is anchored here by that bolt, and then it's hooked to the other end of the trigger. What we're going to do is it feeds through this piece here, and that's what allows the throttle to work for the carburetor. So we just have to make sure that both those are secure on both ends, and we feed this through for this barrel fitting here, and then we put the carburetor on. Carburetor's on. Before we get it bolted tight, we'll feed the cable through the throttle itself, like I was talking about, and that will lock in place. Make sure it's all routed correctly, and then you can actually see it. Should be able to see it work in the carburetor. Got a new muffler and gasket to put on our engine. There was no way I was going to get this this whole muffler off of that hardware, so I've got new hardware, gasket, and a new muffler to put in. The reason this gasket is as big as it is because it's actually a shield against the fuel tank that keeps the fuel from getting hot. Alright, now we'll get those finished snugged off there. The bottom of this fits into part of the housing that goes on it. And then, so we set our coil tomorrow, put the housing cover back on it and the plug, and then we'll give her a try. So I'm setting the air gap for the coil now by using a piece of a business card to put between the magnet on the flywheel and the actual coil itself. So now that I have that distance, I'll take and tighten those screws up. And once I've done that, we'll pull the screw, we'll pull the card out, and we have our distance now for the air gap for the coil. Next thing now is to bolt our cover back on and then give it a try. Runs like a new one. Doing the fenders for this pull tractor, there's a transition between here and here that we need to get rid of. He wants them perfectly smooth. So the first thing we're going to do is lay a strip of fiberglass along that seam to get it a little more level, like this one here, which has already been done. Then after this gets 40'd down with 40 grit paper, we'll put a thin layer, hopefully, of body filler over it, and then we'll be able to smooth it out to make it look like it was all done as one piece. So that's what we're working on now. Alejandro is wetting out the fiberglass. And we'll get those laid on, push out the air, and wait for them to cure. You've seen him do this in much earlier episodes on that Ford Ranger. And then once all that's done all the way up to the seam, so that it ends up looking like this one, we'll sand them down again and put on some filler to smooth them out. We have a nice first coat of body filler on now. About to put one on this other fender. And once we get both these to dry, we'll hit them with 40 grit Then we'll bring the next coat on. That'll help to get things smoothed out and make it look like it's one piece. Next time on Bulldog Builds, we'll see how our pull tractor fenders are coming along. I will definitely have paint on our 36 Harley frame, and I'm sure I'll find something else cool to work on. See you next week.